Hello and welcome once again to episode 16 of Code Completion. We are a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name once again is Dimitri and I'll be your host for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionists, Ben
Hey, hey.
and Fernando.
Hello, hello.
So it's been a while, both of you. Fernando, how do you like your Mini?
I
Maybe which mini?
love it.
We should preface it with which mini.
Oh, yeah.
Since there's been so many
The
mini
iPhone
updates.
Mini. The only mini I have currently in my possession is my iPhone Mini. It's an ocean blue, navy blue. I don't know the
Pacific
exact
Blue.
name.
Pacific
Blue.
Or is that the Pro? I don't know.
I think that's the
It's-
Pro.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the blue.
The blue.
And
The blue one.
John Gruber, as always, he just describes everything that I have in my mind in his articles. And he said that the Mini is like the phone we probably could have gotten if we didn't go to the plus size eventually. Right?
Like if we never went down that direction.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. And I think that just hits the nail right on the head. Like, this is a super nice phone that's small by today's standards, and it's just so nice to use. It really reminds me of the iPhone 4. Like, the first time you go from non-retina to retina, it's like unbelievable. And this phone, it's like, I don't know what it is, but it's just amazing. It's just such a good phone. I love it. But I will say, and Dimitri and I briefly spoke about this, I want more, or rather, instead of more, I want less. Something that's never, I don't think this, like, the SE, when we had our episode about the possibilities of, like, the smaller phones, we sort of agreed that it may happen. It was sort of a long shot, but it may happen that they launch a phone like the Mini. But I don't think this is ever happening. But I would love a Mini in the original iPhone size.
So a mini
I would
mini.
An
absolutely love
iPhone
it.
Nano.
Yes.
Fine.
A Nano. Yes. A shuffle, if you will. No.
No, not a shuffle. We want a
You
screen.
want a screen. Yeah, we want a screen.
Yeah.
And buttons of some kind.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at. This is the best phone I've had, bar none. It's unbelievably good. I would love it if it were smaller, but still, it's such a nitpick.
Nice.
It's so nice being able to hold your phone like this again.
Yeah,
One-handed,
again.
just use that index finger.
Yep.
Awesome.
So that's where I'm at. Yeah. What about you guys? Dimitri, you have a Mini too, right?
Yeah, so
Or two minis, should I say?
I got 3 minis. I got the iPhone mini, which is like, thankfully, we have a small phone again. I wish it had like the big boy cameras as the bigger phones have, but I am totally okay with this. And I also got a Mac Mini, which is blazing fast. And we also got a HomePod Mini, which sounds relatively good for listening to podcasts. I don't really listen to music, so I can't speak in that regard. But it was mostly so that way we can have turn the lights on in the bathroom. Actual reasons to shell out $100 for a HomePod, and it works excellently for that. We are able to hear the HomePod perfectly fine over the noise of shower, which is like the only use that we kind of had for it. And that is kind of perfect. So
Nice.
I am so happy with all the minis that I have received.
And you have already a regular HomePod, right? The full size one.
Mm-hmm.
So have you tried the intercom feature at all? Does that work?
So the intercom feature works with just the regular HomePods, and we already have like one in every main room that we have.
Okay.
So with the mini, it just kind of adds to that.
Right.
I think there was that special intercom feature where it like knows where you are at, and I didn't get a chance to try that. I don't even know how it works.
Nice. Do you find
So,
yourself like
Ben,
actually using that though? Like, do you think you'd like instead of yelling across the house at your wife, you think you would actually like use the intercom feature to speak to her from a different room, or does it seem more gimmicky than useful?
So we actually use the intercom feature quite a lot. because it's as you said, more practical than yelling across. We would use the
Right.
walkie-talkie app on the watch
Right.
previous to that,
Yeah.
to kind of get it across, because no one's happy when everyone's just yelling and not hearing,
Right.
because even yelling is not loud enough, kind of thing.
Right.
I was going to ask you about that. How does the intercom feature compare to walkie-talkie?
It's better quality, like way better quality, because it's not coming out of your little watch speaker.
And it works, right? Since the intercom,
But
since
in,
the
like-
walkie-talkie feature kind of
like,
mysteriously stopped
yeah.
working.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. Like, is it useful?
Yeah, I would say it's useful. The only thing is you need to know like where the person is. Otherwise, it'll just kind of blast on every HomePod in the house, and ever so slightly delayed. It's not like all at once.
Oh, interesting.
So it's a little bit trippy, just to hear your own voice coming out of like every corner of the house when you mess that up. And I'm not too sure how to get like intercom working to specific devices yet, like to her phone or anything like that. So it's still worth kind of exploring a bit to see how best that works.
Nice.
So Ben, I hear you also got a new toy.
Yes, it is not as mini as some of those mini things, but it is mini to me because I've had mostly MacBook Pros in my sort of computing life as a Mac user, and mostly the larger ones, mostly the 15-inch ones. I didn't get the 16-inch, the most recent iteration, but I've had mostly fairly large, fairly heavy laptops in the past, and I've always been a little envious, a little jealous of people who get to use the MacBook Air because it just seemed impossibly thin and impossibly light and just really cool. And in particular, when they went to Retina in I think 2018, I want to say, it was just like there's just very little excuse to not get a MacBook Air, except that I use applications that tend to be fairly hefty, things like Xcode. And I've done research and tried to, look at Reddit posts and stuff like that to see, is it possible to even do that kind of work on a MacBook Air? And people are like, maybe, maybe not. Just it's always been a little bit kind of on the fence. So I haven't gotten one because it was just like, well, it probably from a performance perspective would just be not good enough. And so earlier this year, I traded my MacBook Pro in for an iMac, a 5K iMac, as sort of my primary computing device, which I love. It's awesome. I'm recording on it right now, and it's great. But once I did that, I realized that this laptop form factor is definitely something that is useful in certain situations. And so I thought, well, I'd like to maybe get sort of a, people call it like a couch computer or something that you can kind of carry around with you to do stuff. And so I actually sold my iPad to my dad because I wasn't using it a ton, and I was like, let's get rid of that and save those pennies for maybe this mythical future Apple Silicon MacBook, right? And maybe, just maybe, if it's powerful enough, I could get away with a MacBook Air rather than a Pro, and then I get to finally get the MacBook Air that I've always kind of wanted. So that's a very long-winded story to say that, yes, I got a MacBook Air, the new M1 powered MacBook Air. And first impressions are that it is just as light and thin and sort of wonderful as like a little laptop as I thought it would be, kind of just the form factor overall. And then so far I am, much like everybody else that has played with these so far, kind of blown away at how fast and quiet and cold the computer is. One of the best parts is that it doesn't get just sort of disgustingly hot in your lap when you're using it. It has no fan, and it generally runs very, very cool. And so far I got it, today's Thursday? I got it on Monday. And I did not charge it when I pulled it out of the box. I just took whatever battery it had, which I think it was around, I don't know, like 80-ish% when I pulled it out of the box, and I still have not charged it, and it's Thursday night. So I haven't used it a ton, but still, that's kind of insane considering that normally a regular computer, I would have charged it 3 or 4 times by now. And it still has, I think, like 50% battery left. So it's just the battery is amazing. The performance is fantastic. I haven't had any issues. I kind of realized when I started to set it up for work stuff that I was like, oh, well, Slack and Microsoft Teams and some other things that may not play nice on the the Apple Silicon on the ARM architecture, but Rosetta is just kind of kicking in and working where it needs to, and it's I don't really have anything other to say than what people have already said, which is it really is as amazing a PC as it claims to be, and it is also arguably sort of the worst of the Apple Silicon MacBook of computers they're probably ever going to release, because it's the first chip and it's in sort of the thinnest and smallest form factor, therefore having the smallest thermal envelope. So there's just not as much wiggle room there, right, to drive that chip super hard. And yet, even still, with all of those caveats, it is just blowing the doors off of everything that's come before it. And so it is both great. I really, really like it as a computer, and I'm going to be happy with it as a secondary computer for a decent while. But then also, it's really exciting to think like, well, if this is their first go at this, what are they going to do next? Like, how could they top this? Obviously, they can, but it just shows you, if they were to stick this thing into an iMac form factor, they could probably run this thing at just these crazy speeds, and literally not even blow everybody else out of the water. But I mean, you're playing on a whole different level. Like you're starting to lap the competition, kind of like they've done with their A series chips and the iPhones, right? They're not even really competitive, because it's like, I've been around the track 3 or 4 times in the time it takes you to go on the track once. It's kind of laughable how much better these things are than everybody else's.
Yeah, it's quite amazing how much performance they were able to really eke out of these new processors, and they're just showing it off at this point. It's like, oh, this is in a battery-bound device that has no fan, by the way,
right?
And like, depending on what you're doing, it will outclass our Mac Pro,
right?
That's like fully spec'd out, which is a kind of bit ridiculous. Like, I know you said you kind of wanted this as your secondary computer.
Right.
It may become your primary, because it's just going to compile things so much faster than your iMac for certain tasks.
And the instant on is so cool. Like I'm opening the lid, and before I even get the lid all the way open, it's already awake. It's already ready for Touch ID, and then Touch ID is responding instantly. I mean, it's just like an iOS device in that way. It is there is no delay at all. And for people who have used Mac laptops in the last several years, it can be, particularly because of all the like weird stuff they do when the computer wakes up, it can be a couple of seconds before the thing is sort of fully ready to accept your password or to accept your fingerprint or whatever. So the fact that this thing is it just snaps to life immediately, it's a small thing, but it's cool. It's really, really cool.
Mm-hmm. I heard from Stephen Troughton-Smith, I think, that the monitor, like if you have an external monitor and you plug it in, it just instantly comes on. There's no flickering. There's no like, let's wind this one down and bring it back up to think about where we want to place Windows. Have you given that a try yet? With an external?
I haven't plugged it in yet, but I just found, I was listening to ATP actually a little earlier today, External Tech Podcast, and they suggested that you try changing the display resolution. Because that also is this thing where normally it would flicker, it would kind of fade to black, that whole thing. It's just an instant snap right from one resolution to the other. So I'm keen to try that when we finish recording here, to see what that looks like, because it's supposedly it's magical how fast that is. Which it's silly. Those are silly things to be excited about, but
nerd magic,
right? But like it's so cool. What I think makes us all so excited about this is these things all by themselves are interesting, but not ultimately that spectacular. But what it is, it's showing you the possibility, right? Like it's showing you the possibility of what we all could build with these tools, and the experience that we could have, and the experience that we could have from Apple improving on this process. I mean, they've already lapped the competition, but they're just going to keep increasing that lead the further they go, and it's pretty cool to see. We were in these doldrums for a couple of years, particularly with Apple laptops, right, where the keyboards were not great, and then Intel has just been, I don't know what they're doing, but they're not innovating like they were, having serious troubles. And so we were getting, maybe a tiny little increase here and there when Apple would get around to to putting a new chip in, and they often wouldn't because they're like, why bother, right? This chip isn't really any better than the one that we already have. And so it's cool to kind of be in a position again where we know how cool this is, and we also can see, the next year or 2 or 3, we can kind of envision a roadmap that is going to have serious innovation baked right in, which is just super cool.
I think there's two really really interesting things here. To sidetrack a little bit, I have a little bit of Apple stock saved, and like a year or two ago, I constantly like invest in that. Besides my retirement, it's just like an alternate retirement, right?
Yeah.
My early retirement, hopefully. But a couple of years, like probably around 2018, I started worrying because that's when we started really seeing the trend of iPhones slow down. They're still, like, Apple is still printing money with the iPhones. They're still doing it every single quarter, but the growth dramatically slowed down because they, like, it's just natural, right?
Yeah.
You've saturated the market because you're the best product in the market. But what's interesting about this, and I kept thinking about it this week, is that the Mac is the opposite of the iPhone. Like, for years, we thought the Mac was behind. They didn't care about it.
Right.
And even though you started seeing a lot more people with their Macs, there's still a very, very tiny percentage of the whole PC market.
Yeah.
And now, like, they can bring these, like the Mini. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. The Air, the Air, which in my mind is kind of like a Mini in a non-trademarkable kind of way, like you said, like a small laptop. That's unbelievable, because I don't know if Apple will do this, but they've already done it with the iPhones. But what if, like, this first generation M1 next year goes down to like $700? And the next year it goes to 500. Like, I don't know if they're going to be doing that, but if they do, like, what can the other competitors do? HP, Toshiba, like the really heavy hitters. What can you do? Like, you're like you said, you're 20 years behind. I mean, you don't have the technology to do anything about it.
Unless they want to spin up their own fab and start making their own chips, I don't think that they have much in the way of competition, right? I mean,
yeah, no, right. So, I mean, I don't think you can do that, can you? Like, I think HP tried a little bit, but they're not. Apple was in a do or die situation in the 2000s, and that really propelled them for like the next decade.
Yeah,
and I don't think any other company is there with that kind of grit needed to do the whole, all right, we're going to suck it up and do this from the ground up.
And you bring up a really good point about the MacBooks. Like, you could do what they've been doing with the iPhones, where next year when they bring out the M2 MacBook Air, they could keep the M1 MacBook Air around, and suddenly it's the cheap MacBook Air, right? Like you have a $999 version, and then you have the M1 MacBook Air, which is still amazing, for $699, right? And then you start to do what they did with the old iPhone becomes the one that was the good iPhone has become like the cheap iPhone, and then there's the new iPhone, which is sort of better. You could do that with I don't think they could get away with doing that in sort of an Intel world, because people would be like, I'm not buying it, it's just old, I don't want it. But when you're lapping the competition, even your old stuff is still, like, for the most part, better than
way faster,
right? Than lots of things. So you could start to have like this tier, these tiers of pricing of the computers in a way that's similar to the iPhone. And then suddenly you start to, truly that whole like cheap Mac that everyone always has said they want. I don't know if that would actually really, really sell, but because I feel like people who are truly price conscious are not gonna necessarily go for stuff like that, but maybe they would, right? I don't know. I'm not an economist or whatever. But like you have like the tiers, and you have all, and it starts to you start to really attack all the sort of pricing categories, right? And then it's like, what reason do you have to not get a Mac? Like there's so many options, right?
Exactly. And like Jobs already said a few years ago. Well, not a few years ago. It's been a while.
It's at least 9.
At least 9, yeah. He said, if someone's going to cannibalize us, let that be us.
Yeah.
Right? We want to cannibalize ourselves.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that just don't like or want an iPad.
Right.
Like, hello. Like, but but I do want a couch computer.
Right.
Like, and if I could get like a really cheap Mac, like a really good Mac for like $500,
Yeah.
like a laptop, 12-inch M1.
Yeah.
Once we're at the M3 stage,
Right.
I would do it in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So I would buy one for my parents.
Right.
Like, no kidding. I would do it like that.
Yeah.
So it's like going back to the stock thing. I think this opens up a world of possibilities where the weakness of the Mac now becomes its strength.
Yeah.
Like now you can grow out of that position.
Yeah.
So it's like this is unbelievable in so many aspects that I like. It's history in the making for sure.
Yeah. How does your...
Yeah, you can definitely
Oh, go ahead.
you can definitely see like different tiers coming through, especially if you consider the 8 GB 256 SSD model can be that lower tier. That's an M1 that costs $150-$200 less, and then you can go ahead and jump to the M2 if you want to upgrade those other components as well. That can definitely make a lot of sense now that there aren't very many configurable components that are available. So you get extra power with your memory upgrade, for instance.
Right. How does your new Mini because you got the M1 Mini, right, Dimitri? How does that compare with sort of the Minis that you used before? And I'm guessing because I think you have the DTK, right, but which you probably can't compare. But I don't know.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But basically, like, let's just say this: the Mini that you got, the M1 Mini, how does it compare to the other Minis that you've used before? And we'll just put, include all. Just generalize your experience, I guess.
Things in mini-like enclosures.
Yeah.
So one thing that I noticed is that I think the box was larger, and I'm not sure. I didn't actually compare this, but I have opened many mini boxes in the past, so like I had a visual reference in my mind's eye, if you will. So I think the box was larger, but the mini itself was the same size. I had some to compare it to. It's a downside that it doesn't come with like 10 gig Ethernet and more Thunderbolt ports. And I think the fact that the new Mini is only in silver kind of leads up to a space gray model coming eventually that will have those expanded feature set. And I'm hoping for April, like they said. So that said, just running some quick benchmarks in terms of video encode, I got great results out of it. It's mostly in terms of being able to encode H.265s and 10-bit. That's where I saw like a huge amount of speed. Now, as far as using it, like booting up, it was very fast. Booting up from like cold, way faster than what I'm typically used to. But it kind of leads into an interesting side story of the Mac is its software side, because I am not using it with a monitor or mouse or keyboard. I'm using it headless, and it's already disappeared from like the local network. And I had to like remove it from where I put it and connect the monitor to it to kind of like see what was going on. And like that's the only downside.
Yeah.
We have such powerful computers now that are kind of hamstrung by Mac OS in a way,
Right.
and prevented from being truly useful in so many different situations, just because Mac OS has its own little issues.
Right.
Like kind of going into our next topic that we were going to talk about, when Big Sur launched, it caused such a huge amount of traffic on Apple servers that it also brought down their certificate verification servers, which had a side effect of making it impossible to launch Mac apps if you were running on if you had your computer connected to the internet. So like there's all sorts of these like software limitations that kind of hold back Apple's own system, which is super unfortunate because they are hitting it out of the park with their hardware, and they have been for at least a decade. Like it used to be that you never bought the first Apple product of a certain like new generation, and that was the iron rule amongst Mac users. You never buy the first product. There was always issues with it. We've been so conditioned with the iPhone generation that like the brand new iPhone comes out, it's probably rock solid.
Right.
And like yes, there are issues, but at the volume that iPhones are freaking selling at, it's not an issue.
And people said that about
So
this. They said, people were like, I don't know, first Apple Silicon Macs, I'm probably not going to get one. It's, it's going to need some ironing out, whatever. And I had thoughts like that, like, well, I don't know. And then, the first kind of reviews started to come out that it was like, it's blazingly fast and it's super solid and Big Sur runs great, which, for all of the issues with things like Mac OS, it's pretty amazing that they got Big Sur to run as cleanly as it seems to be running on my Intel iMac as it is running on this brand new, never before seen M1 MacBook Air. And it's the same OS. Pretty cool that it works as well as it does, considering it has to run on those two vastly different architectures.
It's a feat of engineering
Yeah.
for sure. And I just want to I don't know if you said this, Dimitri, but I just want to clarify that the servers didn't go down.
no, they're just
It
inaccessible.
was such a
to
weird
certain
edge
extent.
case. Like, I bet you none of us would have caught that if we had been working on that team.
Yeah,
We'd be like,
the connection could be made, but a response was never heard.
Right.
That kind of situation.
right.
But no, I disagree with you, Ben. Like, that's just a simple timeout. It's
Yeah.
somebody's application launching. Like, you would think about this.
Well, right, but what I'm saying is, like, I think it wouldn't have been I think it would have been potentially fairly normal for us to think like, well, we're going to do this check, assuming that we can get to Apple's servers, they're going to give us some kind of response. Like, I feel like the hubris basically of assuming that Apple's infrastructure
agree.
is strong enough that it could withstand all kinds of things, and it's like, well, if I can get on the internet and I can get to the server, it's going to give me an answer, right? Like, it's Apple servers. Like, we're a $2 trillion company. So I feel like that the hubris was basically assuming that was going to be always true, and I don't think that's unreasonable to assume. The downside, of course, is that no, it can happen. It can be where you're on the internet, you can talk to the server, but the server is just completely overwhelmed and can't respond, and so you need to have a way to sort of, because they did say that if you opened your Mac up and let's say you didn't have any network connectivity, the little checks that
It would
occur,
launch right away.
it skips them because it says, oh, well, I can't talk to the internet, so I'm not going to even try, right? So it did have sophistication in that way. It just didn't. They were like, well, clearly, it sounds very NASA to me, where it's like, obviously this isn't going to fail. Like, it's going to be fine. Well, what if
but
it
you're
does?
not NASA.
Yeah, what if it does?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, one situation where a lot of Apple services kind of fall flat in this regard is running on like enterprise networks where everything
Yeah.
is kind of blocked, but not really blocked. And that's where a lot of these services just like start failing. Your time starts getting out of sync. Like iCloud just has no idea what's going on. And I don't think Apple has tested things very well in those kinds of situations because it is so poor to use Mac like software and Mac OS in those situations. It really is kind of like the nightmare scenario for most developers, but like it needs to work, and sometimes it flat out doesn't. Now we should specify why on earth Apple was checking on whether an app should run or not. And it was basically to enforce security. So that way, Apple can go ahead and say, hey, the app that you're about to launch, well, its signature is valid and is something that is not something that has been turned into something malicious. So therefore, you're not going to harm your computer by running this. And that's like such an important thing that we've just come to accept as far as like using our Macs, that we're not going to get a virus or have something bad happen just by running software. But Apple has had to keep up with that industry for that to stay true. Like if you have a much older Mac, it is much more vulnerable in all sorts of different ways to just downloading the wrong piece of software and double clicking it and having it run. Yes, it might not be able to do certain things that could have happened in the past, but it can still start encrypting all your files and leaving you kind of in a rut as to what you can do in that situation. So I don't think Apple's doing anything nefarious with these signature checks, and I think it's a good thing that they are happening. And like, of course, as soon as this hit, there were the conspiracy theories that kind of blew out of control. That Apple is tracking everything, and they want to see which apps they should be competing against, and all that. It's like Apple has enough problems; they don't care about what apps you're running for the most part. So, like, it's something that needed to be done, and it's unfortunate that it was done and implemented in such a way that could like crash so spectacularly
Yeah.
on a launch day for
Yeah.
their new OS.
Yeah.
But it's good to see that they were like responded over the weekend, which they generally never do, and said, okay, we acknowledge that this was a big screw up, and we have this procedure in place that we're going to go ahead and make things better.
Right.
Can you disable the check?
I believe you can, or they're going to add a way to in the UI to disable the check.
Yeah, I think that one of the things they said in that sort of press release that they put out was that they're going to do a couple things. One of which being they're going to make it an optional thing that you can disable. I'm guessing like in system preferences or in some way you'll be able to turn the check off so that if you don't want it to be performed, it just won't do it.
That makes sense. Because the issue, you mentioned conspiracy theories, and I agree. Like, they're out there. They're way out there.
Yeah.
But an
But they're
important
not totally
point
unfounded
is,
because like there are companies that do those things that are that nefarious, right? So it's not totally crazy to
Agreed.
think that it could be happening. But I do think that, I mean, at the end of the day, we kind of have to trust Apple, right? Because this code is proprietary. But I feel like they have earned a decent amount of trust, not complete
Agreed.
trust, but a decent amount.
But yeah, no, I agree. I agree completely. The point I was going to make is that I trust Apple right now, but I don't know if I'll be trusting Apple in the future.
Yeah.
And if we let them like just get away with doing this check for privacy's sake, I don't know if we're going to suffer. Like, what if Tim Cook gets hit by a bus? Someone else is the new CEO, and they're like, "Yeah, let's do this." Like, we already have all this data. Why are we not collecting it? Like,
Yeah.
we're only trusting them because they haven't done anything nefarious in the past. But I don't know. I'm a little bit iffy about it.
Well, so having
All it takes is
go ahead.
go for it.
Having the check, right, or having the disableable button, I mean, assuming that it actually works, right? Again, a lot of this we have to sort of take on faith, but assuming that it really does work, which you could check by having setting up a proxy and turning it off and then seeing if it still sends the request and stuff like that. So there are ways that you can kind of verify that. Having the check in there to turn it off, I do feel like kind of mitigates a little bit of what you're talking about there, Fernando, where like, even if we're like, I don't think I trust you anymore, you can just turn that off, and then at least that part of it is not a concern.
Yeah. And like many people have said this before, but all it takes is like the wrong people in charge for the benevolent dictator to ruin the whole thing. And we are very much fortunate that Apple is being run by people who at least care about these things. And that's not going to be true forever.
Right.
That is going to eventually change. And Apple is probably going to be so content with its pile of money that it stops innovating in these ways. And at that point, hopefully something else comes up. But until then, Apple is kind of one of the only companies that does care in the ways that we care about,
Right.
With regard to privacy and things like that. So that's kind of all we got, which is kind of unfortunate. But it's going to be very interesting to see if anyone can catch up. But I guess they will be eventually. I mean, Apple caught up, right? They surpassed Qualcomm, which was the master of mobile's chips. They've surpassed Intel, which was the master of desktop chips, and it's only time will tell if like how soon they're going to surpass all the server end chips. And it's not like Apple's going to build another Xserve and they're just going to squander all this power for little MacBook Airs and run circles around everyone, and that's fine. It's unfortunate, but it's fine.
Well, it's not squandering it if that's what you want, right? I finally have the computer that I've wanted, right, which is a MacBook Air that's powerful enough to do what I need to do.
Yeah, but it's not like you're going to plug in your MacBook Air to be your home server.
No,
right?
True.
You never know.
No, I buy a Mini for that, right?
It has been done. Okay, so that leads into our last topic for the week. Fernando, I hear you've been working on something new. Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, I would love to share with you guys. So I've been working on this for a little while. As you guys know, I wrote a book. It's a little bit about how to code, not what to code or what frameworks to use, but how do you code, right? How to think things through, how to consider like tabs versus space. No, I'm kidding. But like in general, the form of the code tells you a lot
That's half
you
the
don't
book,
learn.
right? Tabs
Yeah,
versus spaces.
exactly.
It's 300 pages of just that.
It's a lengthy discussion, but it's worth it. Uh, but yeah, so the more I thought about it, is the where I was getting at is that I feel there's like a huge surface area when it comes to being a developer, right? And the really important part is the actual technical aspect of it, right? The fact that you get to understand the frameworks, that you understand how to code, how to think, how to solve issues, things like that. And I think there's a lot of people out there who do a great job teaching that. Uh, Hacking with Swift, Swift by Sandel, Ray Winderlich. There's a ton of amazing, high quality resources for you to learn that aspect of being a developer. But there's other aspects all around the coding part that I feel are unattended. Like, for instance, code reviews, learning how to interview, learning how to interact with your coworkers as a developer, how to interact with testers. Things that you only learn once you go into a team, and then you're like, okay, I'm ready to code. And then someone's like, oh, but like your code sucks in a code review. And people are like, well, I've gotten a few messages like, how do I get over mean comments in my code reviews? And I'm like, that's hard. It's genuinely hard. It's sometimes harder than tech because you go into a tutorial, you finish the tutorial, you learn to do the thing, you want to do the thing, and then somebody else tells you, no, that's not how you do the thing. And you're like, but this is what I... So without making it much longer, like without ranting too much, what I've done is I've created a small take-home test that takes into account some of the basics, basically networking, generics, unit tests. And what I've done is I've packed that up. I have a video where I go through the solution and I explain what I would check if I were interviewing other people with that take-home test. And I did another video with a student that went through the test, and we go on a one-on-one explaining like, well, this is a common pitfall, you shouldn't be doing this, or why are you doing this? Well, like I had on one of my test runs, I had one of my students go through the one-on-one, and then I asked him, well, why are you calling dispatch queue main here to update the UI? And he was like, well, because we always do that. And I'm like, that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to capture. Because, of course, you know the answer and you can read it in like any of those amazing blogs. But it's not until someone else with more experience tells you, hey, do you know why?
Yeah.
Not just don't do it like a robot. Tell me why that you start to internalize the concepts. So yeah, that's what I'm working on. I think it's kind of interesting, to be honest.
Fernando, I have a question to you.
Yes.
Why is it that you should only make a date formatter once?
Oh my God, I don't know. they're valuable. No, date formatters are
Because-
very expensive, Dimitri.
That's all the documentation says, but we never know why is it expensive.
I mean,
I've been thinking
you
about
really
this for
need
so
to know
long.
why. Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? But that's the point. That's the thing I want to share. You should always be worrying about the why, and I've seen a lot of students not worry about the why. Like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to capture.
Well, and it's
No,
the difference between like someone who knows how to construct sort of a basic object, right, from parts, and then like someone else who knows how to do that and can also explain to you why the thing works when you put it together, right? Like that's the difference between like sort of a craftsman and like someone who can follow a recipe.
Exactly.
That's a very tortured metaphor I just constructed, but like, but you
A
know,
cook and a chef.
yeah, a cook and a chef. There you go. So like somebody who's a cook, and this is probably going to make cooks mad everywhere. But like a cook, we're gonna pretend that a cook is someone who basically runs from a recipe and can construct a meal based on instructions provided to them So they know how to cut and they know how to chop and saute, and they do have skill, right? But that they may not understand why is this meal delicious, and what of those ingredients makes it extra tasty versus you could tweak it a little and suddenly it's like fine, but it's not great. And I think the same thing is true with programming. Like you can get by building all kinds of stuff in a way that is fine or even maybe good, but in order to get to greatness, you have to know what about a great application, what makes it great, right? What specifically are you doing differently compared to sort of how you might do it in general? And I think that is something. It definitely seems like that's something that juniors in particular are like really hungry for, right? Whenever you talk to a junior about coding, they're like, "Well, yeah, I know how to like do for loops and I can make a basic iOS app, but like, how do I make Instagram, right?" And I'm not even going to say that Instagram is a great app. I have no idea what it looks like on the under the covers. It could be a hot mess, which it probably is. I mean, it's huge and run by hundreds of people, so it's probably just inherently kind of messy because that's just how it works. But how do I make an app that's great, right? And so I think oftentimes all we have to really tell them is just like it takes experience, right? Like that's the difference between someone who can cook and someone who's a chef. But I really like that you're trying to go beyond the sort of the senior like shrug and then like, well, it takes experience. And you're trying to sort of elucidate what does that mean? Like give me actual steps, give me a technique, give me things to practice.
It's funny that go ahead, Dimitri.
And to be clear, it's not like you need to know the why.
No.
Like you can get very far just knowing the how, and as long as it's the correct how, I should clarify
Yes.
that if you do know the correct techniques, you can get very far with your techniques, and you can gain a ton of experience building things out. So you kind of learn to run before kind of learning how to do fancy tricks with your feet. That like it's that kind of mentality where you learn the task at hand and you can go ahead and make use of it right away. That's tremendously useful for your productivity because you can go ahead and have confidence that you can do something. But it's only after that you kind of get all of that you start running into walls, and knowing the why can really help you overcome those walls. And as a developer, invent brand new ways of going about solving solutions. Because up and like if you just know the different methods of like, oh, if you do this you get this result, and you know hundreds of those, you can put together all sorts of different things, but you're never really inventing something brand new. And that's kind of one of the joys of being a developer, is you can literally write code that has never been written before, and to make something happen that hasn't been really explored. And you can invent something brand new. But the only way for you to really pull that off is to know the why. So that way you have the tools that are necessary to go ahead and invent something new.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing I've noticed is that I've seen that we as an industry really appreciate the how, but and when you like, it's just like Ben said, when you try to get to the why, usually it's just experience. But it's like there ought to be a repeatable scientific way of gaining that elusive experience other than just, you got to open up 10 pull requests and get the answers out of me. Yeah, so it's like I guess that's what I'm trying to do. If I had to just summarize it quickly, it's like instead of opening 10, like instead of taking a take-home test with a real company and then the company giving you no feedback, you do the same take-home test and you get feedback.
Right.
So because that's how you learn. That's experience.
Right.
And I don't think any of the amazing resources that I mentioned previously give that to you, because it's impossible, right? They're huge, like Paul Hudson. I don't know how he does it. We've said it a few times, and Swift by Sandel. They just like output a ton of content. Like it's unbelievable. And
I'm
the
convinced
benefit
he's figured out how to clone himself, because that's the only way that he can produce that
he
much
has
content.
a time turner.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the benefit is that since I'm doing this on my spare time, I can actually dedicate time to the why instead of the how.
Right.
So, yeah, yeah, it's fun. I I really like this topic, and I really like discussing it with you guys because you guys know exactly how I feel since you've taught other developers. Like, this is important.
And that's what's really annoying. That's maybe the most, well, there's lots of things that are annoying about sort of the job interviewing process in the software world. But I think maybe one of the most annoying things about that is that you get no feedback really either way, right? So you take home test, you do an interview, and basically you either get the job or you don't. If you get the job, you could assume that you're like, well, I did all the right things. That's why I got the job, right? That's probably not true, but you could just assume that. But you don't really have any way to know, well, which of the things was the thing that I did that got me the job. And then if you don't get the job, you also don't really ever get any feedback. Like, what did I do wrong? What were the things that kind of made me sort of what I got cut from rather than I got to move on to the next thing. And that includes how I performed on the take-home test, what I did in the interview. Kind of either way, whether you get it or not, it's a very binary thing, and you just you just sort of like, well, I got the job. So then if you go to get another job, you're like, I guess I'll just do the same things I did before, and hopefully this company will value them in the same way that the previous one did, which may be true, may not be true. And it's just like, it's so frustrating that we that as an industry, it seems like we are almost allergic to the idea of ever providing feedback of any kind, whether the person gets the job or not, to those candidates to help them grow. And you'd think that even if we're just from like a self-interest point of view, that companies would be somewhat incentivized to do something like that, because I can tell you from someone who has done a fair amount of hiring myself, sort of being on the other side of things, it's exhausting to be part of the hiring process and to sift through so many people who are clearly not qualified for the position that we've put out, right? And for one reason, I just don't have time to like tell the 97 people out of 100 that they didn't get it, like why they didn't get it or what, it's just like I can't. It's just a matter of time. Like I just don't have time to do that. And I suppose I should practice what I preach, and I should probably start at least telling the people who did get the job, here's why, like, so that when inevitably you leave, because I don't expect you to work here for the rest of your career. That's silly, particularly for juniors, right? If you're hiring a junior, like 1 to 3 years probably is what you could expect out of a junior before they move on. I could do that, but certainly that only helps the one person that gets it. That doesn't help the 100 people that don't. And it's so strange that you'd think, even from a self-interest point of view, that we'd be interested in trying to make that better, because I feel like it would help obviously the candidates, but it would also help the employers, because you might end up with just a little bit more self-sorting and stuff like that, so that you end up with the candidates that do come in are just higher quality. I'm going to say that, sort of more of a fit, right? More of a fit for the job. Instead of what you usually get, which is like a huge broad array from like a few people who are super qualified to people that are just like, how did you even find this job description? Like, it's not that they're not smart, but just that like you are so far away from the kind of person that we need for this skill wise. I don't even know how you came across this job posting. So it's just it's very strange.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Do me?
I was gonna end it. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. I have one more comment. Like the last thing I will say is that there's also there's zero standardization as to how we interview people.
Right.
There's so many different ways, and I think if I can push the needle a little bit towards like take-home tests and judging someone by their code that they do on their home when they're like without pressure.
Right.
I think that's super valuable for everyone. Just like you said, Ben, like I've been on the other side hiring people, and it's just, even if you start finding the right people, it's hard to invest so much time on them and then only choose one for the job. So at the very least, if I can reduce the amount that you spend because the quality of the applicants is so much higher, I mean, I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, demystifying it would be
a very noble goal, I think.
Thank you.
Definitely. So on the topic of improving one's development skills, this week's episode is once again brought to you by Bon Voyage, a new full-stack iOS application development course from Johnny B. With this course, you'll learn how to build both a full iOS client app and an associated React web administration app. The app and the site will integrate with Firebase, as well as Stripe and Plaid for payment processing. Bon Voyage is a place to book extravagant vacations, and you'll gain the skills to build the iOS app from the ground up and integrate everything you need to provide a world-class vacation booking experience. To find out more and sign up for the course, visit bonvoyageapp.com/course, and be sure to follow Bon Voyage's instructor at Johnny B. Codes on Twitter to stay up to date with all his courses. Thanks again to Bon Voyage e-commerce app course for sponsoring Code Completion, and be sure to follow Johnny B Codes, that's JONNYBCODES, on Twitter to stay up to date. So now that we have gone through all our topics, it's time for Complete the Code, where we quiz our listeners on your knowledge of Swift, Apple, and all things development. Ben, it's been a while. Can you take us away?
Sure. Last week we had a prompt that involved an array. Let the first array be a constant array composed of 0, 1, or 2. Let the second array be a variable array assigned to the first array. The underlying storage will still be shared at this stage. Finally, we want to append 3 to the second array, which will copy the underlying storage and update it only for the second array. So that's the prompt from last week. And we do have a winner, Sean Barry, who guessed correctly. The method is known uniquely referenced, and we want to use all copy on write types use this is known uniquely referenced method to implement the copy on mutate function. So it's a mutating function called update that takes a generic value t and then checks to see if it is not uniquely referenced, and then it copies it. So this week we've got a new prompt. And the prompt is, what etymology led to the random number generator of choice on Apple platforms being named arc for random? So you may remember before we had the newer Swift random functions, we had one called arc for random, and it allowed you to generate a random number. So the question is, why did they call it that? And if you think you know the answer, go ahead and tweet at us with the Complete the Code hashtag. And if you get it right, we'll give you a shout out next week's episode.
Thanks, Ben. And with all that out of the way, it's time for Compiler Error, a segment where I get to test my fellow completionist knowledge about Swift, Apple, and all things development. So we all know and love Swift, which owes its inspiration from Objective-C, of course, which owes its inspiration from Smalltalk. So that's our topic for this week. So we have 4 statements for this week, all Smalltalk related. So let's give that a go. So unlike many languages, Smalltalk has no if statement, let alone other control structures. Control flow is instead implementing as methods sent to objects. Statement number 2, like Objective-C, Smalltalk makes use of argument labels on each of a method's arguments, but does not wrap every method call in square brackets. Statement number 3, only 6 keywords are reserved in Smalltalk: true, false, nil, self, super, and this context, which are all called pseudo-variables in the language. And statement number 4, like many languages in the 80s, Smalltalk uses the dot character to access properties, the semicolon to delineate statements, and curly brackets to denote blocks. So, Ben, why don't we go with you first?
All right.
Yes.
Lucked out again, Fernando. So let's see. Number 1, it has no if statement or any other control flow structures, and instead uses methods sent to objects to manage control flow. I could buy that as being true. I've never seen Smalltalk syntax before, so I'm totally flying blind here. But from what I know about how Objective-C sort of like the things that it inherited and stuff like that, I could see message passing being a sort of like writ large, like that's going to be what we're going to do for everything, rather than having control flow. So I can buy that as being true, but I also kind of feel like that could just be weird enough to be false. So I'm gonna reserve that as a maybe. The next one, that it uses argument labels on each of the method arguments like Objective-C does, but doesn't wrap it in square brackets. I want to say that is actually one of the things that they pulled from Smalltalk to use in Objective-C, but again, I could have that history wrong. Once again, all I can think of is hearing Andrew Madsen in my head going, "How do you not know these things?" Because He's a total language nerd, and sort of a computer history nerd, and I'm sure would ace this in a second. But third one, only 6 keywords: true, false, nil, self, super, and this context. Again, seems reasonable. Particularly, we're talking about a language, used back in the 80s. It's not going to be as necessarily as sophisticated as some of the ones now, so I could buy that. I mean, only one of these is false, so 3 of them have to be true. And then the last one, using dot character for property, semicolon for statements, and curly brackets to denote blocks, seems very, very straightforward. And those are definitely things that were Objective-C staples. So that seems, again, like something that, could easily have been inherited from Smalltalk to Objective-C. So I feel like that's probably true. So let's eliminate that one. Let's eliminate number 3. It sounds reasonable that they would only have those 6 keywords. So we're down to 1 or 2. It's basically no control flow statements and messages or methods instead, or doesn't wrap its method calls in square brackets. I don't know. It's a toss up. I feel like I'm gonna go with number 1 because I'm pretty sure that Objective-C got its idea for that from Smalltalk about the brackets. But again, I could be totally wrong. So I'm going with number 1. Good luck, Fernando.
So number 1 is the compiler error. Fernando, what say you?
Hopefully that helped.
I think it did a little bit. But Dimitri, you have the uncanny ability of making me like completely certain that I'm right. And then like you're Lucy and the football. That's who you are. You're Lucy and the football. And I'm like, I sure am gonna kick that football this time.
Got some splaining to do.
I think I have no idea if 1, 2, or 3 are correct. I'm fairly certain number 4 is incorrect. Just because you said curly brackets to denote blocks, and blocks were not a part of Objective-C originally. They were added later down the road. The dot character, that is also interesting because in Objective-C, the dot character, I also want to say was not part of the original. I want to say that came after. So I'm going to go with number 4. Like I said, 1, 2, and 3 all seem completely ridiculous to me. So I wouldn't be able to choose. So I choose number 4.
And
Final answer.
For the record, I interpreted blocks to mean code blocks, not necessarily like a formalized block, right? Like we know it today. More of like a generic term of like any block of code, but...
Oh no, do I?
Final say, Fernando.
but you already said your final answer, so...
Yes, I already did. That's fair.
But I think you're right about the dot character, though. I feel like that was like an Objective-C 2 thing. But again, we're stabbing in the dark here. We don't really know what we're talking about.
Just end me, Dimitri.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with some fun facts about Smalltalk, since it wasn't as sophisticated as Ben said. It basically pioneered object-oriented programming, and it also pioneered just-in-time compilers and virtual machines.
Wow.
So it was very much ahead of its time.
Nice.
In terms of where most programming languages were. So let's go ahead and start with the ones you both agree with. So let's start with number 2. So like Objective-C, Smalltalk makes use of argument labels on each of a method's arguments, but does not wrap every method call in square brackets. And that is true. There's no delineation between one method call and the next. In Smalltalk, it's just a plain white space for the most part. So you have the receiver space, argument label, colon, argument space, argument label 2, colon, argument, etc.
I will say that for number 2, now that I think about it and I'm a little bit less hyped up with the adrenaline, number 2 did sound like it wouldn't be the compiler error because I have never seen anyone complain about Smalltalk and square brackets, and I've seen everyone complain about Objective-C and square brackets. So yeah, I can see this.
Fair argument. So let's go to number 3 next. So only 6 keywords are reserved in Smalltalk: true, false, nil, self, super, and this context. And that's kind of what makes Smalltalk small, because this is, after all, a code completion like number 2. And Smalltalk really doesn't have much to the language
Wow.
itself. Most of it comes from other facets. And if this one is true, it kind of leads into number 1, because if those are the only keywords,
Right.
then what about if and for
Right.
and all of our usual control flow? And it turns out all of that is implemented using methods on Boolean types or other types. So, like, the typical example is true and false are objects, and they respond to is equal. And you can essentially put together a crazy if statement using just those as building blocks. So that kind of was the statement that inspired this whole thing. So I'm sorry, Ben, that is also a code completion there. Which, congratulations, Fernando. You
I
snuffed
did it.
out the compiler error.
You kicked the football.
I kicked the football.
So, like many languages in the 80s, Smalltalk uses the dot character to access properties, the semicolon to delineate statements, and the curly brackets to denote blocks. So, do you want to take a guess as far as which part of that is fictitious?
I think the dot character is the one that pushed me over the edge. Did you mean blocks as in lambda, or blocks as in just code blocks, like Ben was thinking?
Either. Because they're
Okay,
the same
then
thing.
definitely that.
Smalltalk.
What a cop-out.
Yeah, then definitely that.
So, the dot character, a fun surprise, is used to delineate statements. So you just kind of put a period at the end of your sentence, and that is that. The semicolon is used to cascade method calls. So just like in Objective-C, where we have like the inner brackets and then the outer brackets and then the outer brackets and then the outer brackets, that kind of chain. With Smalltalk, you put a semicolon and then you can call the next method. Put a semicolon, call the next method, and it would kind of cascade onto that same receiver.
So then
Very
the output
language-
of the previous one becomes the input to the next one.
Exactly. And our friends, the square brackets, are actually used to denote blocks. So that's where they come in with Smalltalk, which is kind of where Objective-C gets its inspiration from, because if you have a single method call inside of a block, it has square brackets. So aside from that, Smalltalk looks very wonky with respect to like the languages that we're kind of used to nowadays. Objective-C, C, Swift included, JavaScript. All those languages all kind of look the same for the most part. Square brackets aside in Objective-C, but Smalltalk looks extra wonky. But you can kind of see how it looks a little bit like Objective-C in some cases. But yeah, so great job, Fernando, on snuffing out the compiler error this time.
This was not luck. It was pure skill.
You say that now.
So, as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Code Completion to know when new episodes get released, and feel free to tweet us if there are any topics you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's really your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. If you know the answer for Complete the Code, be sure to tweet at us as well. You don't have to wait for me to tweet it. You can definitely jump the gun and tweet at us early and skip the line and get there first if you know the answer. So once again, I want to give my thanks to Ben, who is at Ferrous Guy. That's FERROUSGUY on Twitter. Is that fast enough,
Yeah,
Ben?
that's good.
And Fernando, who is at From Junior to Senior. That's FROMJRTOSR, for joining me this week. My name once again is Dimitri, and you can find me at Dimitri Buñol. That's DIMITRIBOUNIOL. And we'll be sure to see you all next week.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Nice. Slowing down your name so we could be faster. So I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry for Smalltalk. It is bonkers.
It is crazy. I was doing the same thing.
What?
I'm glad you agree with me.
It's so weird.
Like, what is even going on?
Yeah, well, that's not code. That's just gibberish that my 3-year-old typed into the keyboard.
So this is a method with an argument. So that kind of looks like a little bit like Objective-C. This
Yeah.
is declaring a new variable. This is a Boolean operation that evaluates, and if false, it takes a block that it will go ahead and do something. So this is the receiver of the if false method. And here is some Objective-C self-halt.
Yeah.
It's the closest I got
Yeah.
of any of this.
So is this a white space dependent language like Python or
No. So this period is the end of a statement. This period is also the end of a statement.
That's so weird.
So you could write all of that in a single line, like the first 3 lines.
If you really wanted to, I guess you could.
insane.
And you can put the Y directly after the previous period. You don't even need to have a space. You can just.
I don't know. I don't think there are properties, to be fair. So good job sniffing that one out. But yeah, this was completely bonkers. I first heard of Smalltalk because of this example of like, oh hey, there's no such thing as an if statement. It's just a Boolean message call.
Right.
And another fun fact is the compiler is an object in the language, and you could rewrite parts of it if you wanted to, and it will recompile the new code that comes
Wow.
afterwards differently.
Man.
It would recompile itself.
Yeah, because it's a virtual machine, so you can go ahead and change the implementation out, and then it would just go ahead and use that new implementation for the rest of the code that comes.
So now
That does smell like Objective-C.
I'm
Like
That's
that's
part of it.
Objective-C shenanigans. Absolutely.
so now I'm looking up what came in Objective-C 2.0. It looks like modern garbage collection,
Property syntax, right?
syntax enhancements, runtime performance improvements, and 64-bit support. It was released in 2007. So properties, the @ property was a new thing.
Array literals.
Yeah, array literals.
But what about 1.0?
1.0 basically looks like the Objective-C we know and love today, except there was no alloc in it. It was just new.
Yeah.
No,
And there was no reference counting.
no,
That
it's
was
the other way around, right? New comes later.
New comes from Smalltalk.
Oh, of course it does.
Kidding.
No,
Really? So it
there's
was-
definitely a new somewhere in here.
So it was new, and then they decided to go with alloc init as a 2-stage.
yeah, as the underlying implementation for new.
No, I refuse to believe that.